Welcome, everyone. My name is Stacy Glass. I'll serve as your host for today's coffee break, along with our communications lead, Sonia Elmquist, who will be monitoring the chat, the questions, and the polls. Hi, Sonia. Because this is such a short coffee break, we're not going to have time to do much Q&A. But if you have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we'll follow up after the session. We added this webinar to our Science of Clean Beauty series because so many of you had said that you knew our featured guests, EDF, Credo, and Sephora, but you wanted to know more about ChemFORWARD. So today we'll feature our resident expert in green chemistry and safer alternatives, Dr. Lauren Hein. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Stacy.
So I'll do a brief introduction. Lauren has dedicated her career to protecting human and environmental health by applying alternatives assessment, green chemistry, green engineering, and multi-stakeholder collaboration to the development of practical tools and processes. A few highlights from her career that you may be familiar with include the creation and development of the green screen for safer chemicals, that very popular methodology, the creation and development of clean ingredients, a database of safer trade name chemicals in partnership with the US EPA Safer Choice Program, such a great model. And she co-chairs the Apple Green Chemistry Advisory Board among her many advisory positions. I'll just say on a personal note, I met Lauren almost 10 years ago, and we've worked together in one way or another ever since then. She is a trusted advisor on science and systems change, and she was the obvious choice when we had the opportunity to create a global infrastructure for chemical hazard data and safer alternatives. Lauren is co-founder and the Director of Science and Data Integrity for ChemFORWARD. She and I share a deep belief that when people have better information, they make better decisions. And we together are committed to creating access to that information. So let's dive into the conversation. Lauren, I'm going to start out with a softball. Help everyone kind of understand, how did you come to this work and why does it matter to you?
Thanks, Stacy. I've always been passionate about the environment, getting outdoors, nature, animals, natural beauty. And in grad school, I studied environmental chemistry, environmental engineering, and ethics. And I love to work on problems that combine all three. And I guess I got into this specifically. My first job post-graduation was as a fellow with the American Association for the Advancement of Science at the US EPA in the green chemistry program, working with Paul and Nastis. And on my very first day of work, with the ink on my diploma still degassing, the head of the design for the environment program asked me how it felt to know that my degree was obsolete. I probably looked puzzled, and he said, "This end-of-life cleanup is history. The future is about designing problems out from the start." And I was hooked. So ChemFORWARD is a culmination of a lot of work that came before, not just by me, of course, but by many other people as well.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's great. It had to be so disheartening after earning your PhD to you're not going to need any of that. Let's get on with the work we have to do here. Well, you just mentioned this too, that we really need a historical perspective to how we've gotten to this point. So why now, after more than 25 years of work on this topic, have you launched ChemFORWARD?
Okay, Sonia, would you mind showing that slide? Thanks. A while ago started putting this together. I've been in this field a while and was starting to think about how did we get here and what's changed. And back, there's three, I think, really big shifts that happened. The first was a change in thinking away from what is bad to what is better. And that was a really fundamental shift. And back in the 90s, I think you probably heard the phrase whack-a-mole. And that refers to banning one chemical only to have one with similar properties come up to replace it. That's a form of regrettable substitution. But some of the key influencers in the shift from focusing on what is better instead of what is bad were, I'd have to say, Bill McDonough, Michael Braungart, with the cradle-to-cradle design paradigm. And they viewed chemicals and materials as nutrients in biological and technical cycles at that time. Other key influencers, many of them came from the US EPA, the Green Chemistry program with Paul Anastas, and then the Design for the Environment program, Clive Davies, Charlie Auer, who actually was, I think, one level up from there, David D. Fiore. They recognized the importance of designing inherently safer products and processes and providing information and recognition for those who did so. So the DFE was really foundational to alternative assessment, and through DFE came things like clean ingredients, the US EPA Safer Chemical Ingredient List, and AA criteria too. The next development was really the ability to compare chemicals based on inherent hazards. It wasn't always as easy. Well, not that it's easy now, but it wasn't always as clear as the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling was not launched until 2003. It's updated every 2 years. The US EPA partnerships, the DFE partnership started about the same time and really started to institutionalize the idea of comparing chemicals based on a suite of hazards. European REACH legislation was implemented in about 2007 based on the principle that with no data comes no market. And Green Screen for Safer Chemicals built on GHS and DFE prepared their criteria in 2011, and ChemFORWARD was launched in 2020, building on the shoulders of all of this good work and wanted to take things to the next level of scale. And finally, where we are today is at a place where we recognize that hazard isn't the only attribute of importance when it comes to chemicals. They have to be functional, they have to be available, they have to be reduce impacts from exposure. And so there's a wonderful book called Making Better Environmental Decisions by Mary O'Brien that I recommend to anybody who's interested in alternatives assessment. There are a number of frameworks that have emerged. One of the earliest, as I mentioned, is the DFE partnerships. The Lowell Center produced an AA framework in 2006. REACH uses alternatives assessment as part of their authorization. The Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse has an AA guide, and the National Academy of Sciences published a framework. And then in 2018, there was the launch of the Association for the Advancement of Alternatives Assessment, or A4. So now there's a professional society committed to the improvement and advancement of A4. These are all huge advancements, and ChemFORWARD is a really important piece of the puzzle here that really facilitates alternatives assessment, in part because it's a living database of alternatives that can continue to grow with time.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a really helpful historical perspective, and really talking about why now is the moment for such a data set, and that it really builds on this evolution that's been going on for quite some time.
That's right. That's right. And I also want to say why now too is that I have the occasion to work with you, Stacy. You have fabulous vision, energy, smarts, and drive. And I think our partnership is incredibly complementary. And so I know I love working with a partner. And so, finding the right partner, we have very different skill sets and they're very complementary. And I think that gives me a lot of hope that we're gonna do this.
Yeah, and I couldn't do it without you. So I'm glad we're in it together. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, today you're going to walk us through a couple of things: eliminating high hazards, avoiding regrettable substitutions, and finding safer alternatives. And as we were preparing for this, I remembered that we co-authored a Green Biz series way back when, I think it was 2012. And I dusted off this old graphic, if Sonia will share it, which seemed aspirational at the time that we were working on it, but now it seems within our reach. So can you walk us through these activities and how this is relevant to kind of the folks listening today?
Sure. This initially began as steps that people take when they start thinking about moving to safer chemistry. And in a way they are steps, but they're also things that we see that people do concurrently. That's why it's called concurrent strategies, because many companies need to focus on eliminating chemicals on restricted substances lists or that are regulated. That is kind of what we call bringing up the bottom. It's a must do, and you need to do this to reduce business and regulatory risk. But as soon as you get away from chemicals on an RSL, the next question is, have you moved to something safer? Just because it's not on a list doesn't mean it's got staying power and that it was a great choice. So it's really important to substitute, to practice informed substitution. You want to have hazard assessments of the chemicals that a substitute for the chemical of concern. You need the data. You need to reduce your uncertainty. You want to avoid regrettable substitutions and kind of future-proof your products. And then finally, after you do that enough times, you realize that maybe I could start building things with green building blocks from the start. I can future-proof. I can get away from the race of staying ahead of regulations. And I can design with systems thinking, looking for materials that are safe and that also facilitate circularity. So we're really trying to optimize to more than just hazard. We're optimizing using the framework of alternatives assessment, in a sense, to optimize for safe, circular, socially beneficial, etc.
That's great. It seems so simple now, and it actually seems possible now. So I was really inspired when I pulled this out and thought about how much progress we'd made. Before you take us through the platform, I thought this would be a great moment to hear from our audience. So audience, we're going to put up a quick poll. Where do you find safer alternatives? And we've got multiple options here, and you can pick multiple options. You know, talk to suppliers, read industry publications. Go ahead and launch the poll.
You have to do it this time, Stacy.
I do, yes. Okay, I've got it. And I'll just take a minute here to, okay. We'll leave this open for a minute. Please go ahead and vote. And while you're doing that, I'll leave this up for just a minute. And Lauren's getting ready to do the demo. What I wanted to do is put this in a little bit of context. You're probably aware that there are approximately 84,000 chemicals on the market. And the shocking fact is that only about 1% of them have comprehensive and accessible hazard information. I realized this when I was working for the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, trying to realize that beautiful design vision. And when I realized that this was a data organization, verification, and scaling problem, I thought, we can solve this. We must solve this. But we can only do it by working together, by having brave collaborations and with shared data. And so we started ChemFORWARD to create a shared, globally harmonized, so can work with any GHS-based system, cost-effective, trusted chemical hazard assessment and safer alternatives data set. As a nonprofit independent organization, we've established transparent systems and processes to build trust, consistency, and end duplicative effort. There's a lot of, reassessing the same chemical over and over again. We can stop that with this shared data set. So this is enabling the use of definitive science to inform proactive decision-making by designers and formulators. And so the data set we've created here is going to help you eliminate chemicals of concern by showing you known problematic chemicals, avoid regrettable substitutions by illuminating what Lauren was saying, all these human and environmental endpoints, impacts, and the roots of exposure, so you can understand trade-offs if you have to make a trade-off to achieve your performance or other design goals. And is going to help you select safer alternatives from the beginning. And these safer alternatives have been fully vetted. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And we will share the results and see what we've got here. It looks like the majority of people talk to their suppliers, conduct their own scientific research, and a little bit of dabbling of other things. Well, I hope that what you'll see here is it will help you to centralize some of that work right here in ChemFORWARD. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing that. And Lauren, I'd love to turn it over to you to lead the demo.
Great, thank you. That's interesting that it's split between talking to suppliers and scientific research.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know more about who does what.
I should have mentioned, please, in the chat box, if there's another way that you find alternatives that we didn't mention, please put that in the chat box. And also, if you want to elaborate on anything there, we'd love to hear from you. Sonia's monitoring the chat.
Great. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. So this is ChemFORWARD to be launched very soon. And we think of alternatives by what we call verticals. So this is the beauty and personal care or cosmetics vertical. And each vertical has chemical ingredients listed by function, by application, by chemical class. We also retain what we used to call portfolios, but now we call them safer alternatives. And these are curated sets of safer alternatives based on function. So for example, alternatives to phthalate, fragrance, solvent, and fixative, pretty specific applications. So you come into the system and we're gonna start by searching for some solvents. And what you're gonna see, first of all, is the hazard band rating. That's the most obvious thing. And anything that is rated an A is low hazard, low risk. B might have some moderate hazards, but low risk. C, moderate to high hazards and moderate risk or uncertainty, that meaning data gaps that could result in moderate risk. U means that a chemical hazard assessment's been completed, but there's too many data gaps to give it a rating. F means there's high hazards and potentially high risk in many scenarios, and a question mark means there is no comprehensive chemical hazard assessment performed yet. So I want to be clear that ChemFORWARD did not create a method for chemical hazard assessment. We base our methodology on GHS, cradle to cradle material health. We can add other methods that we want going forward. But the hazard bands are a nice way to sort of level the playing field between chemicals that maybe are on the EPA scale, that have a cradle to cradle score. Just makes it a real user-friendly way to see results, because some of the other scoring methods, their results are rather complex and not as intuitive as we would like. So let's say we go ahead and we're gonna, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and just jump tabs for speed. So I'm gonna pick solvents, and this is what will show up in the ChemFORWARD solvent tab. And you can see that here, that there, where there's a CHA, there are some things in here that do not have full chemical hazard assessments because they're on the EPA scale. It also tells you if a chemical is on any regulatory or non-regulatory restricted substances list. In this case, benzyl alcohol is, you're allowed to use it, but there are restrictions to the level of use due to certain of its properties. So let's start. If you think about that diagram that Stacy just shared, the concurrent strategies, let's take a look at, say, chemicals you might not want to use. You might not feel comfortable using something that doesn't have an assessment. Let's say, take a look at something like toluene here that's given, it has an F. So if you go to click toluene, we actually don't have a chemical hazard assessment for toluene. The reason this is an F is because we use the list screening results from Pharos. So Pharos is integrated into ChemFORWARD. So we don't really feel that there's a need to assess these chemicals for which there are a whole lot of lists that would indicate that it has some high hazards. So we're really trying to keep focused on the safer and the better alternatives. So let's say that you're looking for something better. I would say that anything that falls into the A or B range is going to be a really good bet. If that fits your performance requirements, let's take a look, say at triacetin. Here you can see a data summary. This one was done by Tox Services. You can see here that when it expires, you can look at the physical properties. Say you're looking for a particular solubility or boiling point range, you know, is it a VOC, things like that. You can see if it's on any regulatory list. Here we also include, for cosmetics purposes, the point of departure calculation for this chemical, which can be very, very valuable. Identifiers can include synonyms, other trade names, other ways of communicating the identity of the chemical, and then the hazards. And here, what's really neat, I think, about ChemFORWARD is that the assessor enters data into the back end of the system, and then the results are displayed in two different formats. This format is the GHS format, and it includes, it's color coded. NC means not classified, which is basically low. CNP means there's no data or insufficient data. Italic in parenthesis means it's low confidence, and then bold means high confidence. So here you can click on a cell, it gives you the rationale, which the assessor entered into the back end, that explains why it came up with this classification. And then what's really neat is you can then toggle over to the cradle-to-cradle hazard summary table and see what the results look like when you use cradle-to-cradle certified material health criteria. Same data on the back end, different results on the front end. You can see that it's cradle-to-cradle has like endocrine activity. This one, there is no definitive data, although there's a lot of studies suggesting that it's not endocrine active. It's broken out by species. You can broken out by exposure route, so you can see where there are data and where there are no data tied to exposure. So it tells you a lot. Sadly, there's no such thing as a chemical that fills every single one of these cells for every single exposure route, but we're getting closer, and with the advent of predictive toxicology tools, I think we'll be able to fill more and more data gaps. So I would suggest that this one's looking pretty good. And then, but let's say the only chemical that really, really works for you based on boiling point or whatever is something that's a yellow. And in this case, this one does have some moderate hazards and some data gaps. So we think when you see something that, say, falls into the C hazard band, that's a really good time to make sure you take a good look at the summary hazard table. What does this mean that it's a Cat 3 for, what was that, respiratory irritation, right? Is that going to be a problem for the type of application you're using? It's a Cat 3 for aquatic toxicity. Is it something that's going out into the water, a lot of it? Is it biodegradable? Can you offset? Seeing the hazards allows you to make more informed choices about whether this is an okay ingredient for you. So let me see, I didn't look in my notes at all, but I think that is all I need to say about that. So I'm going to stop.
Perfect, Lauren. You covered it really well, and what I really appreciate, and user testing has told us that too, that a lot of the formulators just want a hot lead. They want to look for that ABC and start their process there. But when you do find a C, you need to dig in and understand what's really going on. And sometimes the regulatory folks or the scientists involved in the process might need that more detailed information. But we want to start you with the thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this a hot lead for you or not? So that's great. Thank you. You did a great job. Let's, we've ended every session with this. So with just 2 minutes to go, can you offer some actionable advice for the audience to help them accelerate their leadership in clean beauty?
Sure, sure. What we see is it's important to think beyond RSLs. Don't think that just because you're not using chemicals on a leading brand's restricted substances list means that everything's free and clear. There continues to be more and more information, more and more classifications, more and more chemicals added to RSLs. You're much better off understanding the chemicals that you're using, knowing their hazards, and and future-proofing your products. It's important to human and environmental health impacts. These things go down the drain. What happens to them? Are they readily biodegradable? Are they toxic to fish and other aquatic species? Anything in the A or B range in our system would be rapidly degradable, so you don't have to worry about that. It fits well with the circular economy goal. So you need to prioritize transparency. I guess that would be the third piece. You want to know what you know and know what you don't know about the chemical hazards, and work with chemical suppliers who have an explicit commitment to safety and sustainability for humans and the environment, and who are willing to provide the evidence needed on the hazard properties of the chemicals they sell. That's real leadership, and we see that in more and more and more companies and chemical suppliers who are willing to do that. You know, if 50% of you are learning about ingredients from your suppliers, make sure those suppliers are committed to transparency and sustainability. So I think that's all I'll share. So it's go beyond RSL, consider human and environmental impacts, prioritize transparency with your products and with your supplier.
Oh, that's fantastic, Lauren. You just, yeah, very concise and helpful. I really appreciate that. So let me just say to the audience as we wrap up here with 1 minute, you can reach out to us if you need help finding safer alternatives. We've made the platform now available to our co-design partners, and we're doing pre-sales for 2021. So if this is something that could help you in your work, reach out and we'll help you learn more. And also if those of you that have safer ingredients that you'd like to be posted on this platform, we can also onboard you through our process there. So follow our progress on LinkedIn, visit our website at chemforward.org. And I want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon.